The silent council, the desperate journey ambassador Chiron of the Zephyron, stood at the entrance of the grand Galactic Assembly Hall. Her silver skin had lost its natural shimmer, now appearing dull and gray like tarnished metal. She carried with her a small crystal device that held the last recordings from her dying world. The massive doors opened before her with a sound like distant thunder. Inside, representatives from over 400 civilizations waited in their designated sections. The chamber was vast enough to hold entire buildings, with seating arranged in circular tiers that rose toward a domed ceiling, displaying the swirling cosmos above. A plea before Jansk Rain walked across the polished floor, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Every eye, sensor, and consciousness in the room focused on her. She reached the central platform and activated the crystal device. Holographic images burst into existence around her, showing the horror that had befallen her people. Cities stood empty, their streets littered with the fallen. Hospitals overflowed with the sick and dying. Children lay motionless in their parents' arms. The void plague had come to Zephyros like a shadow, and nothing could stop it. The disease attacked the nervous system of her species specifically, shutting down their bodies from within. It spread through the air, through water, through touch. In 6 months, it had reduced their population from 8 billion to less than 2 billion, and the numbers fell every single day. Words that carried no weight. Chiron began to speak, her voice amplified across the chamber through translation devices that converted her words into hundreds of languages simultaneously. She explained how the plague had appeared without warning. She described how their finest medical minds had worked without rest to find a cure, only to fail again and again. She told them about the children who would never grow up, the artists who would never create again, the scientists whose brilliant minds were fading into darkness. She begged them to share their medical knowledge, to send their researchers, to help her people find a cure before it was too late. Her voice cracked with emotion as she spoke of her own family, her daughter who had died just weeks ago, her son, who lay in a medical facility with only days left to live. The cold response High Chancellor Vexer of the Krillian Dominion was the first to respond. His species resembled walking crystals, their bodies formed from living gemstone that pulsed with inner light. His voice carried the weight of authority and absolute certainty. He spoke of protocols and procedures, of the careful balance that must be maintained in galactic affairs. The Zephyron system, he explained, was located in what the Assembly classified as Zone Tertiary, meaning it fell outside the primary protection radius. Medical intervention on this scale would require approval from 17 different committees, a process that typically took 3 to 5 years. By then, Chiron thought with despair, there would be no Zephyron left to save. The mathematics of indifference Counselor Thrain of the Quilox Unity rose next. Her species appeared as flowing masses of luminescent gas contained within energy fields. She spoke with what might have been sympathy, but her words offered no hope. The economic analysis was clear, she explained. Deploying medical teams to Zephyros would cost approximately 400 million galactic credits. Research into a species-specific plague cure could take years and require resources that might be better spent on diseases affecting multiple species. The Quilox had run the calculations, and the return on investment simply did not justify the expense. Chiron felt something die inside her as she listened to her people's lives reduced to numbers in an equation. Ancient wisdom. Empty Comfort, the eldest of the Morphean collective, spoke next, his ancient form barely visible within the shadows of his seating area. The Morpheans were one of the oldest species in the galaxy, having achieved space travel, while humans were still learning to use stone tools. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but carried across the chamber with perfect clarity. He spoke of cycles and patterns, of species that had risen and fallen across millions of years. Extinction, he said, was part of the natural order. The galaxy had seen countless species disappear, and it would see countless more do the same. The Morphians had learned long ago that attachment led to suffering. Better to accept what cannot, be changed, and to fight against the inevitable tide of cosmic fate. The voice of Prophet Trade Master Zolix of the Merchants' Confederation approached the matter from a different angle. His species, the Vorn, resembled large insects with multifaceted eyes and chitinous bodies decorated with precious metals and jewels. He spoke of the practical considerations that others had been too polite to mention directly. The Zephyron economy had already collapsed. Their trade routes were abandoned, their exports had ceased, and their currency had lost all value in galactic markets. Even if they were saved, it would take decades for them to rebuild and resume their place as productive members of the galactic community. The Confederation had stockholders to consider, profit margins to maintain, and quarterly reports to file. Sentiment was a luxury that successful businesses could not afford. Military calculations. General Krath of the Hegemony Defense Fleet added his assessment with military precision. His people, the Drachner, were warriors who resembled armored reptiles standing upright. Their culture valued strength and capability above all else. He explained that the Hegemony maintained extensive databases on every known species, including their military potential, technological advancement, and strategic value. The Zephyron ranked low in all categories. They had no significant military force, no unique technologies that others lacked, and no strategic resources that the galaxy needed. From a defense perspective, their loss would not impact galactic security. Resources spent saving them could instead be used to strengthen defenses against actual threats, like the Ravager Horde or the Machine Collective. The final rejection one by one, the great powers of the galaxy offered their explanations. Some cited legal precedents, others spoke of resource allocation, and still others referenced philosophical principles. All of them said the same thing in different words: no. The Assembly would not help. The Zephyron were on their own. High Chancellor Vixer called for a formal vote, though everyone already knew the outcome. The question was put to the chamber. Should the Galactic Assembly authorize emergency medical intervention for the Zephyron species? The voting lasted less than 30 seconds. Out of 412 voting members, only 7 voted in favor. The motion failed overwhelmingly. A world watching from the shadows in the observation gallery reserved for non-voting species, Captain Marcus Webb of Earth's diplomatic corps watched the proceedings in silence. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for only 40 years, too new to have voting rights in the Assembly. They were allowed to observe, to learn, and to keep quiet. Webb was a career military man who had transitioned to diplomatic service in his 50s. He had gray hair, weathered features, and eyes that had seen too much war back on Earth. He had watched Ambassador Chiron's plea with growing anger, and now as the vote concluded, that anger hardened into something cold and determined. The message. HomeWeb activated his secure quantum communicator, establishing an instant connection to Earth Command, despite the thousands of light years between them. His message was brief and direct. He uploaded the complete recording of the assembly session, then added his own commentary. He described what he had witnessed, the cold dismissal of an entire species suffering. He explained the galactic communities, reasoning, their careful calculations, and logical arguments. Then he asked a simple question: what are we going to do about this? The response came back within minutes. Fleet Admiral Catherine Rodriguez herself appeared on his screen, her dark eyes blazing with determination. She spoke only 3 words, but they were enough. We're going in. The gallery empties. The assembly session concluded with procedural efficiency. Members began filing out of the chamber, already discussing the next items on their agenda. For them, the Zephyron matter was closed, filed away as an unfortunate but unavoidable tragedy. Ambassador Karen remained on the central platform, staring at the empty seats around her. Security personnel approached gently, preparing to escort her out. She clutched her crystal device to her chest, the images of her dying world still playing within it. As she turned to leave, she looked up at the observation gallery. Her eyes met Captain Webb's for just a moment. He placed his hand over his heart in a gesture of respect and solidarity. She nodded slightly, understanding passing between them without words. Then she was led away, disappearing through the massive doors. Humanity stirs. Humanity Stirs Webb remained in the gallery long after everyone else had left. Below him, maintenance drones began cleaning the chamber, erasing all traces of the day's proceedings. The holographic displays were shut down. The cosmic ceiling dimmed. Soon it would be as if the Zephron's plea had never happened at all. But Webb would remember. Humanity would remember. And unlike the ancient powers of the galaxy, humans had not yet learned to ignore the screams of the dying. They had not mastered the art of treating lives as numbers in spreadsheets. They were still young enough, foolish enough, and human enough to believe that when someone cries for help, you answer. Webb left the gallery and headed to the docking bay where his ship waited. He had calls to make, plans to coordinate, and a fleet to help organize. The galaxy had made its decision. Now Earth would make its own. Asterisk when humans answer Earth's war. Room Fleet Admiral Catherine Rodriguez stood before the holographic display in the Earth Defense Command Center, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Around her, military leaders and civilian officials from every nation on Earth watched the same recordings that Captain Webb had transmitted. The images of dying Zephron children played across multiple screens, their silver skin turned gray, their bodies failing. Rodriguez was a woman who had spent 30 years in Earth's Navy, rising through ranks during humanity's expansion into space. She had fought pirates in the asteroid belt, negotiated with hostile alien merchants, and commanded fleets during tense standoffs with rival species. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for this moment. Watching an entire civilization beg for help and being told they were not worth saving. The question that mattered, Secretary. General David Okafor of the United Earth Government spoke first, his deep voice filling the war room. He was a tall man from Nigeria, his hair silver with age, but his mind still sharp as diamond. He asked the question that everyone was thinking, but few wanted to voice aloud. Could Earth actually help the Zephron? Or would this be a suicide mission that accomplished nothing except adding human casualties to an already tragic situation? Rodriguez turned to face the assembled leaders. She pulled up new data on the holographic display, showing Earth's current military and medical capabilities. Humanity had 47 military vessels capable of interstellar travel, along with 12 hospital ships that had been designed for deep space rescue operations. More importantly, they had something the ancient species of the galaxy seemed to have forgotten: the willingness to try. The human advantage Dr. Sarah Chun, Earth's chief xenobiologist, stepped forward to present her analysis. She was a small woman with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing a white lab coat covered in notations and chemical formulas. She had been studying the void plague data for the past 18 hours without sleep, her team working alongside her in the medical research facility. What she had discovered changed everything. The void plague attacked the Zephron nervous system through a method that was actually similar to certain Earth diseases. The galactic powers had dismissed it as incurable because they approached medicine from their own biological perspectives. But humans, with their history of fighting diseases like Ebola, rabies, and prion disorders, recognized patterns that others missed. Chun believed a cure was possible, maybe even probable, if they could get their research teams to Zephyros quickly enough. The debate lasted for 3 hours. Some argued that Earth should not risk its relationship with the Galactic Assembly by acting without authorization. Others pointed out that humanity's resources were still limited, that their ships were needed to defend human colonies, that they had responsibilities to their own people first. But Admiral Rodriguez ended the discussion with a statement that would be remembered in history books for centuries to come. She said that humanity had spent thousands of years fighting each other over differences in skin color, religion, nationality, and ideology. They had committed terrible atrocities in the name of those differences. But now, standing among the stars and looking back at their small blue world, they finally understood a simple truth. When someone is drowning, you do not check their passport before throwing them a rope. You just save them, because that is what decent beings do. The fleet assembles within 24 hours. Earth's response fleet began gathering at Lunar Orbital Station Alpha. Rodriguez commanded from the EDS Endeavour, a massive carrier that served as the flagship of humanity's defense forces. Around her gathered destroyers, frigates, medical ships, and supply vessels. But it was not just military personnel who volunteered for the mission. When word spread that Earth was mounting a rescue operation, thousands of civilians stepped forward. Doctors, nurses, scientists, engineers, even teachers and social workers who wanted to help rebuild Zephron society after the plague was cured. The fleet carried experimental medical equipment, hundreds of tons of supplies, and something that could not be quantified or measured: hope. The journey begins. They jumped to Zephyros. Would take 6 days using Earth's hyperdrive technology. The human ships traveled through hyperspace differently than most galactic vessels, using a method that was faster but required more precise calculations. During the journey, Dr. Chun and her medical teams worked around the clock in the laboratory sections of the hospital ships. They synthesized compounds, ran simulations, and tested theories based on the void plague data. Chun barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination. She knew that every hour mattered, that every day they spent in transit meant thousands more Zephron lives lost. Her team developed 3 potential cure protocols, each one more experimental than the last. They would not know which one worked, or if any of them worked, until they reached Zephyros and began treating actual patients. Arrival at a dying world. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyros system, and what they saw stopped conversations across every ship. The planet hung in space like a beautiful jewel, its surface covered in silver cities that gleamed under the light of its sun. But there was no traffic around it, no ships coming or going, no signs of the bustling civilization that should have been there. It looked like a tomb. Admiral Rodriguez broadcast a message on all frequencies, announcing humanity's arrival and their intention to provide medical assistance. For long minutes, there was no response. Then a weak signal came through, barely coherent. It was Ambassador Chiron, her voice filled with disbelief. She asked if the humans were real, if this was actually happening, or if her plague-fevered mind had finally begun creating hallucinations of rescue that would never come. Landing on Zephyros, human ships approached the planet carefully, following landing coordinates provided by the Zephron ground control. They set down in the capital city of Silvarin, once home to 20 million Zephron. Now the streets were nearly empty, with only emergency workers and the few healthy individuals left moving through the abandoned boulevards. Admiral Rodriguez led the first team to the surface, accompanied by Dr. Chun and a security detail. They were met by Ambassador Chiron and what remained of the Zephron government. Chiron looked worse than she had at the assembly, her silver skin now almost completely gray, her movements slow and pained. She was sick herself, Rodriguez realized. The plague was taking her too, but she continued working because someone had to speak for her people. The race against time, the human medical teams, spread out across Zephyros with military efficiency. They established treatment centers in hospitals, schools, and any building large enough to hold equipment and patients. Dr. Chun set up her primary research laboratory in what had been Zephyros's leading medical university. The building was beautiful, with walls that seemed to be made of liquid silver and windows that showed the cosmos above. But it was also filled with dying patients and exhausted Zephron doctors who had not left their posts in months. Chun began immediately administering the first experimental cure protocol to volunteer patients. The next 72 hours would determine if her theories were correct, or if humanity had traveled across the galaxy, only to watch helplessly as the Zephron died anyway. Breakthrough on the second day. A young Zephron girl named Lyra became the first patient to show improvement. She had been in the final stages of the plague, her nervous system shutting down, her body barely responding. But 6 hours after receiving the human treatment, her silver skin began to brighten. 12 hours later, she opened her eyes and recognized her mother. 24 hours after treatment, she sat up in bed and asked for water. Dr. Chun stood beside Lyra's bed, tears streaming down her face as she watched the girl laugh at something her mother said. The cure worked. It actually worked. Within hours, every medical facility on Zephyros was administering the treatment. The humans had brought enough supplies to treat millions, and they taught Zephron medical staff how to synthesize more using local resources. A world awakens. Over the following weeks, Zephyros began to come back to life. Patients recovered and returned to their homes. Streets that had been silent filled with voices again. Children played in parks that had been empty for months. The silver cities began to gleam once more as their inhabitants restored power and cleaned away the marks of the plague. The human medical teams worked alongside Zephron doctors, treating patients and teaching them everything they had learned about the disease. Admiral Rodriguez walked through Salvaran one morning and saw something that made her stop in wonder. Zephron children were playing with human children, the offspring of the medical workers who had come on the mission. They chased each other through a plaza, laughing in different languages, but understanding the universal game of tag. The galaxy takes notice. News of humanity's success spread through the galactic community like wildfire. The same assembly that had voted against helping the Zephron now demanded explanations. How had primitive humans accomplished what the great civilizations believed impossible? High Chancellor Vexer called an emergency session, his crystalline form pulsing with agitation. He accused humans of violating assembly protocols by intervening without authorization. Admiral Rodriguez was summoned to testify, though as a representative of a non-voting species, she had no official standing. She stood before the assembly, in the same spot where Ambassador Chiron had begged for help, and told them exactly what she thought of their protocols and procedures. A. New Standard Rodriguez spoke without notes or diplomatic caution. She said that humanity had watched the assembly condemn 3 billion innocent beings to death because saving them was not cost-effective or strategically valuable. She said that Earth had learned hard lessons from its own history, lessons about what happens when good people decide that helping others is too expensive or too inconvenient. She told them that humans would not apologize for saving lives, and if that meant violating assembly rules, then perhaps the rules needed to change. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some species applauded, others protested angrily. But Rodriguez was not finished. She proposed a new protocol, the right of rescue. Any species, regardless of voting status or political power, should have the authority to provide humanitarian aid during genuine emergencies without requiring assembly approval. The vote that changed everything. The debate over Rodriguez's proposal lasted for weeks. The ancient powers resisted, arguing that it would create chaos and undermine assembly authority. But something had shifted in the galactic consciousness. The Zephron's survival had captured imaginations across hundreds of worlds. Species that had never paid attention to human activities now watched Earth with new interest. Ambassador Chiron, fully recovered from the plague, spoke passionately in favor of the right of rescue. She was joined by representatives from dozens of smaller species who had watched the Assembly's cold calculations and realized they too could be abandoned if disaster struck. Finally, the vote was called. The right of rescue passed with a narrow majority, fundamentally changing how the galaxy approached humanitarian crises. A new era begins months after the crisis began. Admiral Rodriguez stood on a balcony in Silvarin, watching the sunset paint the Silver City in shades of gold and amber. Ambassador Chiron joined her, moving with the fluid grace of a healthy Zephron. All traces of the plague vanished. She thanked Rodriguez again, though words seemed inadequate for expressing gratitude for the salvation of an entire species. Rodriguez smiled and said that thanks were unnecessary. Humans had simply done what anyone should do when they hear a cry for help. But both of them knew the truth. The galaxy had heard that cry and chosen silence. Only humanity had answered. That choice, that single decision to help when others would not, had announced Earth's presence on the galactic stage more loudly than any military demonstration or technological achievement ever could. The legacy, as Rodriguez's fleet prepared to return to Earth. Thousands of Zephron gathered at the spaceport to see them off. They brought gifts and artwork, wrote songs and poetry about the humans who had saved them. Children drew pictures of human doctors and soldiers, turning them into heroes of legend. The images would hang in Zephron homes for generations. Ambassador Chiron gave Rodriguez a crystal star, a traditional Zephron symbol of eternal gratitude. She said that her people would never forget what humanity had done, and that the Zephron would always stand with Earth, no matter what challenges the future brought. Rodriguez accepted the gift and promised that if the Zephron ever needed help again, humanity would answer. It was a promise that would be tested in the years to come, as Earth took its place among the powers of the galaxy, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple act of caring when others did not. Asterisk.